The single loudest sound I have ever heard in my life was silence. The kind of absolute, deafening quiet that only comes deep in the wilderness after something has just gone terribly, terribly wrong. It was the third night of our annual hunting trip in the Cascade Mountains. Just me, my brother Mark, and his old college buddy, Dave. We'd set up camp in a remote basin, miles from any trail, a place whispered about by old-timers but rarely visited. They called it Whistler's Bowl, not for the birds, but for the strange, whistling winds that would sometimes whip through the pines with an almost human-like intelligence. The first 2 days were perfect. Crisp autumn air, the scent of pine and damp earth, the camaraderie of good friends. We saw an elk sign, but nothing substantial. On the third day, the atmosphere shifted. A heavy, oppressive feeling settled over the valley. The birds went quiet. The squirrels vanished. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. That afternoon, while tracking a deer trail, I found the first one. A footprint, but it wasn't from a deer or a bear or anything I could identify. It was massive, at least 18 inches long, humanoid in shape, pressed deep into the muddy creek bank. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd heard the stories, of course. We all had Bigfoot, Sasquatch, but seeing it, that was different. It felt like a violation, a glimpse into a world that was supposed to remain hidden. I called Mark and Dave over. Mark, ever the skeptic, scoffed. Probably a bear track that slid in the mud. Man, but Dave, a seasoned woodsman, was silent. He knelt, tracing the outline with his finger, his face pale. No bear I've ever seen makes a track like this, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Look at the arch, the way the toes are splayed. That's a bipedal track. We tried to shake it off, blaming the isolation, our minds playing tricks on us. But the unease followed us back to camp like a shadow as twilight bled across the sky, painting the peaks in hues of orange and purple. The whistling began. It wasn't the wind. This was a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. It would rise in pitch to a piercing shriek, then fall silent, only to be answered by another, deeper call from the opposite side of the valley. We huddled around the campfire, rifles clutched tightly in our hands, pretending to be brave. Mark kept trying to crack jokes, but his laughter was brittle, thin. Dave just stared into the dancing flames, his eyes wide and unfocused. The fire, which had felt so comforting just an hour before, now seemed like a tiny, fragile beacon in an ocean of encroaching darkness. The woods beyond the firelight were a solid wall of black, and we all felt it. We were being watched. I was on the first watch, Ahmed Wheatmy, 3006, and a powerful flashlight. I sat with my back against a thick pine, trying to convince myself this was all just nerves. The whistling had stopped, replaced by that crushing silence. Around midnight, I heard a twig snap. It was close. Too close. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the tree line, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. Then, I heard it again. A soft, heavy footfall on the pine needles. Then another. It was circling the camp, just outside the ring of firelight. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. Thump. 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 It was slow, deliberate, a predator sizing up its prey. I woke Mark and Dave with a hissed whisper. Something's out there. It's circling us. They grabbed their rifles, their faces masks of fear in the flickering firelight. We stood, back to back, a tiny, terrified triangle, scanning the impenetrable darkness that surrounded us. The footfalls stopped. The silence returned, more terrifying than the sounds had been. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. We just stood there, straining our ears, every nerve ending screaming. Then came a new sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to rumble up from the very earth beneath us. It was a sound of pure, primal rage, and it sent a wave of ice-cold dread through my veins. Close behind it, from maybe 30 yards away, came the sharp, distinct crack of a large branch being snapped in two. Something big was out there, and it was getting agitated. We didn't fire. We didn't dare. We knew, instinctively, that making our position known, showing aggression, would be a fatal mistake. All we could do was wait for the dawn. That was the longest night of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every groan of a tree branch was the creature, right there, about to rush us. At one point, a rock, about the size of a fist, was thrown into our camp. It landed with a soft thud just feet from the fire. A clear message. A warning. We were intruders in its territory, and we were not welcome. The air grew thick with a foul, musky stench, like a wet dog mixed with rotting garbage and something uniquely wild and unpleasant. It clung to the inside of our nostrils, making Wassa gag. We knew it was close, so close we could almost feel its breath. The night dragged on, second by agonizing second. The fire died down to glowing embers, and the darkness pressed in, threatening to swallow us whole. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We were just three men, stripped of all our modern confidence, reduced to our most primal state, prey. When the first faint hint of gray appeared on the eastern horizon, the presence vanished. It was like a switch was flipped. The oppressive feeling lifted, the stench dissipated, and the forest slowly began to wake up. A lone bird chirped, then another. It was over. We were exhausted, our bodies trembling with adrenaline and lack of sleep. But we were alive. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the forest floor, we saw the evidence of our tormentor. The tracks, they were everywhere. A perfect, unbroken circle of massive, five-toed footprints surrounded our entire campsite. About 20 yards out, they were pressed deep into the soft earth, a clear testament to the immense weight of the creature that had made them. The path that had paced all night was worn into the ground. Following the tracks, we found the broken branch. A piece of oak, as thick as my thigh, snapped clean in two. We packed our gear in a frantic, silent rush, not even bothering to make coffee. We just wanted out. We didn't speak a word as we practically ran the miles back to the truck, constantly looking over our shoulders, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on our backs. We never went back to Whistler's Bowl. Mark doesn't talk about that night, and when I try to bring it up, he just shakes his head and changes the subject. Dave sold his hunting rifles the following year. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of my own home, I can still hear it. That low, mournful whistle. I can still smell that foul, musky stench, and I can still feel that absolute, crushing silence that came right before the footsteps began. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. We weren't alone that night. We had stumbled into the home of something ancient and powerful, and we were lucky to have escaped with just a story. A story about the night we listened to the sound of tracks that circled the camp overnight. Thanks for listening, and if you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more encounters from the deep woods. Stay safe out there. I maintain remote wildlife audio sensors for the state, scattered along creek systems where the larger mammals drift through unnoticed. On June 11th, I hiked into Deadman Draw to service a malfunctioning unit. It is the kind of work I prefer. Alone, methodical, predictable. Locals warned me that the creek carries old stories, older than the pines, and older than the logging roads. I told them wind gets trapped in the canyon and makes voices. Then I took the trail before sunrise. The forest greeted me with a cold stillness. Pine branches held beads of condensation that slid off and tapped the ground like slow rain. My handheld scanner chirped as it picked up mule deer grazing near the ridge. The air smelled of wet bark, mud, and faint mineral dust. Everything looked normal. The only thing missing was the morning chatter of birds. Usually the canopy is alive at dawn, but here it held its breath. I heard one distant call, thin and lonely, then nothing else. Even the wind waited somewhere out of reach. The creek sounded lower than last month, the flow carrying a steady gurgle that echoed off the canyon walls. I stepped down into the creek bed and felt the stones shift under my boots. The sound rang too loudly, bouncing back unnaturally clear. Then I heard another pair of stones shift behind me, timed exactly with my own step. I tested it. One step, another step. Each time, the second sound followed, perfectly matched. When I stopped, it stopped. The creek bed behind me stayed empty. I checked my GPS. The map froze mid-scroll, the timestamp blinking twice before the display went black. My scanner caught static, sharp enough to spike through my headphones. The air changed then, heavier, warmer, tainted with a musky odor, like wet fur baked in sunlight. I told myself an elk had been through recently, though the scent clung too close, too specific. Kept moving. The extra footsteps grew louder, compressed gravel deeper, like something with massive weight tried to mimic me. The alder leaves ahead rustled even though the air stayed dead still. The creek softened behind me, shifting from gurgle to hush, as if it lowered its own voice to listen. A low vibration traveled through the stones. At first, I thought it was distant thunder, but the sky over Deadman Draw stayed clear and sharp. The vibration grew into something like breathing. Slow. Deep. My scanner flickered with faint frequencies I didn't recognize. Then came the whisper. At first, it threaded through the water, almost like it rode the glints between ripples. Soft, subtle. Then it formed shape. My name floated out from the direction of the deeper pool upstream, drawn out, thin, like it had been practiced too many times. I turned toward the sound. That's when I saw it. A shape rising behind the alder. Brush, tall, wide. Its shoulders hunched forward as if the weight of its chest dragged it down. The silhouette towered above the creek bed stones, motionless except for the long, slow tilting of its head. It was studying me. I forced myself to take a step back. The figure took a step too. Perfectly timed. Perfectly matched. The gravel cracked under its weight. Its whisper reached me again, fainter this time, stretched like it traveled from inside a deep throat. I didn't run. Running in creek beds gets people hurt. I kept walking backward, toward higher ground. The figure matched my pace without a single stumble. The trees to its left shivered, though the air still refused to move. My breath clouded even though the temperature hadn't dropped. Closer to the sensor station, the forest shifted. Sound returned first. The low buzz of insects, the distant tap of woodpeckers. The air softened. The oppressive pressure let go of my ribs. When I looked back, the figure had retreated behind the trees, leaving the creek bed still and empty. When I reached the unit, I set down my pack and checked the casing. Everything looked normal except for one detail. The microphone port had been smeared with wet mud, as if something with large fingers had pressed against it. Curious. I wiped it clean and swapped the memory card. Out of habit, I played back the last 5 minutes of recorded audio. Instead of creek sounds, I heard the heavy breathing. Slow. Rhythmic. Close enough that it fogged the mic. Beneath it ran the whisper, circling the station. My name repeated in a low, rumbling tone. I finished the repair quickly and started the hike back. The forest felt lighter, but every so often the stones behind me shifted on their own. Not in rhythm this time, sporadic. Testing. I didn't tattoo Harund. Halfway out, I found a large footprint, pressed into the mud at the creek's edge. Human-shaped, but too wide. The toes oddly long. The print sank several inches into the earth, deeper than any person could make without jumping. At the ridgetop, the wind finally arrived. It carried pine, sap, dust, and the normal sounds of daylight. I breathed easier, though a faint metallic taste clung to the back of my tongue. When I reached my truck, I checked the creek bed one last time. The stones looked undisturbed. The trees swayed naturally. The air moved freely through the canyon. For a moment, I convinced myself that I imagined everything. Then I opened my pack. The spare battery I always keep zipped inside had been turned over, coated in that same wet mud, like something had reached in while I walked. Now, at home, when the house settles at night and the vents shift, I sometimes hear gravel crack with a heavy step. One step, then another, matched to my breathing. matched my heartbeat, waiting for me to move so it can match that too. The forest at dusk has a language all its own. The wind whispers through the pines, and the rustle of leaves sounds like footsteps. For me, a seasoned hunter, these sounds were my native tongue. But on that one particular evening, deep in the Oregon wilderness, the forest began to speak in a dialect I had never heard before, one that chilled me to the bone. It all started with a feeling, that primal sensation of being watched. I was tracking a large buck, its trail fresh on the damp earth. The sun was bleeding out behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. That's when I heard it. Not the snap of a twig under a deer's hoof, but a heavy, deliberate crunch. It was coming from the dense thicket to my left, moving in perfect sync with me. I stopped, and it stopped. He took a step, and it took a step. It was walking parallel to me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another hunter, though it was late in the season and I was miles from any known trail. I called out, "Hello, Anjone? There?" The only reply was the echoing of my own voice, followed by an unnerving silence. The birds had stopped singing. The squirrels had ceased their chattering. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath, listening. I raised my rifle, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Slowly, I continued walking, my eyes scanning the wall of green to my left. The heavy footfalls resumed, mirroring my every move. They were too heavy for a man, too rhythmic for a bear. A bear would shuffle, it would break its rhythm. But this was methodical. It was intelligent. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into a shadowy twilight. The air grew cold, and a strange smell hit my nostrils. It was a pungent, musky odor, like wet dog mixed with something rotten. I'd been around every animal in these woods, and I'd never smelled anything like it. Panic started to creep in, cold and sharp. I decided to make a break for it, to get back to my truck parked miles away. I quickened my pace, my boots slipping on the pine needles. To my horror, the thing walking parallel to me did the same. It wasn't just walking anymore. It was crashing through the undergrowth, keeping pace effortlessly. I could hear massive branches snapping like toothpicks. Whatever it was huge, and it was toying with me. I broke into a full sprint. Adrenaline surged through me, my lungs burning with the effort. Behind me, the sound of my pursuer changed. It was no longer just footsteps. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the trees. A sound so deep it vibrated in my chest. It was a sound of pure, predatory rage. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my mind screaming. The trees became a blur, the ground a treacherous obstacle course of roots and rocks. I stumbled, catching myself on a low-hanging branch, my rifle clattering to the ground. I didn't have time to get it. I scrambled back up and kept running, unarmed and terrified. The growling was closer now, so close I could almost feel the hot breath on my neck. Then, for the first time, I saw it. I burst into a small clearing, and for a split second, it crossed an open patch on the other side, silhouetted against the last light of the fading sky. It was massive, grisly over 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark hair. It moved with a terrifying grace, a bipedal giant that was both man and beast. Its long arms swung as it ran, its head turning slightly in my direction. I saw the glint of 2 eyes, shining with a cold, red intelligence. It wasn't just an animal. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was a Bigfoot. The stories, the blurry photos, the campfire taliste were all real. And one was hunting me. I veered off the game trail, plunging deeper into the untamed wilderness, hoping to lose it in the dense foliage. It was a foolish move. I was on its turf now. The sounds of its pursuit were all around me, a symphony of terror, snapping branches, heavy breathing, and that bone-chilling growl. I could hear it circling, flanking me, cutting off my escape. I was a mouse in a maze, and the Minotaur was closing in. I found a small rock overhang, a shallow cave just big enough to squeeze into. It was a desperate gamble. I slid into the darkness, pressing my back against the cold stone, trying to control my ragged breathing. I pulled my hunting knife from its sheath, my only weapon. It felt like a toothpick against a monster. I sat there in the suffocating dark, listening. The forest had gone silent again. For a long time, there was nothing. Maybe I had lost it. Maybe it had given up. A sliver of hope began to warm my frozen veins. Then, I heard a sniff, a loud, wet inhale right outside the entrance of my hiding spot. The musky stench flooded the small space, making me gag. I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped a knife. A large, dark shape blocked the moonlight from the cave entrance. A massive hand, covered in coarse hair with thick, dirty fingernails, reached in, blindly patting the rock wall, feeling for me. It was inches from my face. I could feel the warmth radiating from its skin. I was paralyzed, locked in a state of pure, primal fear. The hand withdrew. I heard a low grumble of frustration, and then the sound of it moving away. But it didn't go far. I could hear it pacing back and forth in front of the cave, like a guard on patrol. It knew I was in here. It was waiting me out. Hours passed. Each minute was an eternity. The moon climbed high into the sky, casting long, menacing shadows through the trees. I could hear it occasionally, a heavy sigh, the shifting of immense weight. It wasn't leaving. My hope dwindled and died. I was trapped. I thought about my family, my life, everything I would never see again. This was how it ended, cornered in a hole by a creature from a nightmare. As dawn approached, a new sound cut through the air. The faint whine of an engine. It was a logging truck, making an early start on a distant access road. The sound grew louder, a beacon of civilization in this heart of darkness. The pacing outside my cave stopped. I heard another guttural growl, this one filled with annoyance, not aggression. The sound of the truck seemed to bother it. I heard it take a few heavy steps away, and then the sound of it crashing through the forest, its footfalls fading into the distance. It was gone. The truck had scared it away. I waited, not daring to move, until the sun was fully up, its golden light flooding the forest and chasing away the shadows. Trembling, I crawled out of the cave. The area in front was torn up. Huge, man-like footprints were pressed deep into the soil, each one nearly twice the size of my boot. The musky smell still lingered in the air. I didn't bother looking for my rifle. I just ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until I stumbled onto the logging road and flagged down the very truck that had saved my life. The driver looked at me like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd call me crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what hunted me through the night. I sold my hunting gear. I never set foot in those woods again. Some nights, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear it, the heavy footsteps, the guttural growl, and the terrifying sound of the thing that walked parallel. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've had a similar encounter, share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more terrifying tales from the deep woods. Stay safe out there. The forest holds secrets, ancient and deep. Some are whispered on the wind, others are buried beneath layers of leaves and time. But some secrets knock, and you should pray you're not the one who answers. My grandfather used to say that. He was a logger, spent most of his life in the vast, untamed woods of the Pacific Northwest. He'd seen things he couldn't explain, things that made his blood run cold. But the story that always haunted him, the one he only told me once, was about the knock that answered back. It happened in the late fall of '78. His logging crew was deep in a remote section of forest, miles from any town. They were a tight-knit group, seasoned woodsmen who knew the forest like the back of their hands. Or so they thought. The days were getting shorter, the air crisper, and an unsettling quiet had fallen over the woods. The birds had gone silent. The squirrels had vanished. It was a silence that felt heavy, watchful. The first strange thing was the tree structures. They started finding them on the edges of their logging site. Branches thick as a man's thigh, woven together into strange teepee-like shapes. Some were laid out in intricate patterns on the ground. No human could have done it without heavy equipment, and no animal they knew of built things like that. My grandpa's friend, a guy named Mac, just laughed it off. Probably just some kids playing pranks, he'd said, but his eyes told a different story. Then came the sounds at night, low, guttural moans that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar. It was something else. Something that sounded almost human, but twisted, filled with a primal sorrow that chilled them to the bone. They started sleeping with their rifles a little closer. The crackling campfire, their only comfort against the oppressive darkness. The real terror began with the knocking. Loggers have a system of communication in the woods. They use knocks on trees to signal each other. A simple code to track locations or signal a break. 1 knock for "where are you?" 2 for "over here." 3 for "all clear." It was a system they'd used for years, a rhythm as familiar as their own heartbeats. One afternoon, my grandpa was working a bit farther out from the main group. Fell in a large Douglas fir. He was almost done when he heard it. A single, loud knock against a tree, deep in the woods behind him. Standard procedure, he picked up his axe and banged it once against the stump he was standing on. "Where are you?" He waited for the 2-knock reply. Instead, a moment of silence. Then, from the same direction, came the answer. A single, deafening knock. It was a perfect mimic of his own, but louder, more powerful. Like something massive had slammed its fist against a tree trunk. A cold dread washed over him. He knocked again, one solid thud. And again, the single, booming echo came back from the trees. It was answering him, mocking him. He grabbed his gear and hurried back to camp, his heart pounding in his chest. When he told the others, they were unnerved. Mac tried to make a joke of it, but no one was laughing. That night, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. The fire seemed to burn lower, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on their eyes. Around midnight, it started again, a single knock, this time from the ridge overlooking their camp. It was close. Too close. Tech crew boss, a big, no-nonsense man named Hank, grabbed his hippowood rifle. He stood by the fire and shouted into the darkness, "Whoever's out there, sewed yourself. This ain't funny." The only reply was another knock, louder this time, from a different spot. Then another, from the other side of the camp. It was circling them. Whatever it was, there was more than one. Panic began to set in. These were tough men, used to the dangers of the wilderness, but this was something else entirely. This was intelligent. It was playing with them. Hank, determined to end it, decided to knock back. He found a thick log and a rock. He struck the log 3 times, the all-clear signal. He hoped maybe it would confuse whatever was out there, make it think they were just fellow loggers. The woods fell silent for a long, agonizing minute. They held their breath, straining their ears. Then, from the darkness just beyond the firelight, came the reply. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not from a tree trunk, but from the side of their equipment shed. It was inside the camp. That's when the chaos erupted. The men scrambled for their weapons. The dogs they had with them started whimpering and cowering, their tails tucked between their legs. The knocking moved around the camp, a terrifying percussion in the dead of night. A knock on the fuel drums, then on the side of the main cabin. It was fast, impossibly fast. Suddenly, Max screamed. He was pointing towards the edge of the clearing. For a split second, silhouetted by the moonlight, they saw it, a massive, hairy figure, standing on 2 legs. It was taller than any man, broad and powerful. Its eyes seemed to glow with a faint, reddish light. It stood there for a heartbeat, a hulking shadow against the trees, before melting back into the darkness. It didn't attack. It didn't need to. The psychological terror was its weapon. The knocking continued sporadically for the rest of the night, a constant, nerves-rending reminder that they were not alone, that they were surrounded and helpless. No one slept. They just sat huddled by the fire, rifles in hand, jumping at every snap of a twig. As soon as the first hint of dawn broke the horizon, they left everything: equipment, tools, personal belongings. They just packed into their trucks and drove, not stopping until they hit the first paved road. They never went back. The company had to hire another crew to retrieve the equipment, and they reported the site was trashed, not vandalized like a person would do it, but torn apart. Heavy logs were tossed around like firewood, and the metal side of the equipment shed was dented with what looked like a giant fist print. My grandfather never set foot in that part of the forest again. He finished his career closer to civilization, but the memory never left him. He said the scariest part wasn't the creature itself, but the intelligence behind the knocking. It wasn't just a beast acting on instinct. It understood their system. It learned their language. It used their own method of communication to hunt them, to terrorize them, to drive them from its home. It was a message, loud and clear. A warning. The forest has its own guardians, and if you listen closely, you might just hear them knock. But for God's sake, don't knock back. You might not like the answer you get. Thanks for listening to this chilling tale. If you have your own encounter you'd like to share, drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more terrifying true stories from the deep woods. Stay safe out there. The forest has its own rules. Most are simple: respect the quiet, leave no trace, and never, ever underestimate the dark. I learned that last one the hard way, on a solo camping trip deep in the Appalachian wilderness. A trip that started with a simple mistake and ended with a truth I can never unsee. It was late autumn, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I'd been hiking for 2 days, pushing deeper into the backcountry than I ever had before. My goal was a remote valley I'd spotted on a topographical map, a place untouched by trails, promising solitude. By the time I found a suitable clearing to make camp, the sun was already bleeding through the canopy in long, golden shafts. Exhausted, I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and got a small blaze going just as dusk began to steal the remaining light. I was sitting on a large, moss-covered log, enjoying the warmth of the fire and a cup of lukewarm tea when I first felt it. That primal, unnerving sensation of being watched. You know, the one. The hairs on your arms stand up, and your neck prickles. I scanned the dense wall of trees surrounding my tiny camp. Nothing. Just the deepening shadows and the occasional rustle of a small animal in the undergrowth. I dismissed it as campfire paranoia, the kind of jitters every camper gets when they're alone in the wild. I finished my tea and turned my attention to dinner, roasting a couple of sausages over the flames. The forest was settling into its nightly rhythm to hoot of a distant owl, the chirping of crickets. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic. I ate slowly, my eyes fixed on the dancing flames. After cleaning up, I added a few more logs to the fire, wanting it to last long into the night. That's when my gaze fell back on the log I had been sitting on earlier. It was a massive piece of fallen timber, at least 3 feet in diameter, lying parallel to my fire pit. And then it happened. Something so small, so utterly impossible, that my brain refused to process it at first. The log blinked. I froze, a half-eaten granola bar in my hand. Did I just see that? It had to be a trick of the firelight, a shadow playing games with my tired eyes. I stared intently at the log, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. It was just a log. Dark, gnarled bark, covered in patches of green moss. I watched it for a full minute. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. I decided to turn in. The unease was still clinging to me like the damp night air, but I figured a good night's sleep would clear my head. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the flap, and burrowed into my sleeping bag. The fire outside cast flickering, monstrous shapes on the thin nylon walls. Sleep, however, wouldn't come. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded magnified, deliberate. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever, pressing in on my small tent from all sides. Bas. Bass. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was jolted awake by a sound that was not part of the forest's normal chorus. It was a low, guttural grunt, so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was close, terrifyingly close. My breath caught in my throat. I lay there, paralyzed, listening. Silence. Then another sound. A heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of something immense walking, each footfall landing with the weight of a falling tree. It was circling my tent. Slowly, deliberately. I could hear its heavy breathing, a wet, raspy sound that made my skin crawl. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I fumbled in the dark for my headlamp and my bear spray, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The thumping stopped directly outside my tent. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive silence. I held my breath, listening, my ears straining. Then, a smell hit me, a putrid, musky odor, like a wet dog mixed with garbage and something uniquely wild and foul. It seeped through the tent fabric, filling the small space, making May gag. My mind was screaming. This wasn't a bear. I've been around bears. This was something else. Slowly, a shadow fell over the side of my tent, blotting out the dying glow of the fire. It was huge, impossibly tall, blocking what little light there was. I could see the silhouette of a massive head and broad, powerful shoulders. It was standing right there, just a thin layer of nylon separating us. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would just go away. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from its chest, a noise that was part investigation, part threat. Then I heard a soft tearing sound. I risked a peek. A long, thick finger, covered in coarse, dark hair, was poking a small hole in my tent's rainfly. The finger was followed by an eye, a large, dark, and shockingly intelligent eye. It peered in, scanning the inside of the tent, and for a horrifying second, it met mine. There was no malice in that eye, just a profound, ancient curiosity, and a deep-seated sadness that I still can't explain. We were locked in that gaze for what felt like an eternity. The creature, the Bigfoot, the legend made real, was looking right at me, and I was looking back. The moment was broken by a soft click. The head of my flashlight had bumped against the can of bear spray. The creature flinched. Its eye vanished. The shadow pulled back. I heard another low grunt, and then the heavy footsteps started again, moving away from my tent, crashing through the undergrowth with an unnerving speed. The sound faded into the distance, leaving me alone in the ringing silence. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I just sat there, clutching my bear spray, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart until the first rays of dawn pierced the canopy. As soon as it was light enough to see, I scrambled out of my tent. The putrid smell lingered faintly in the air. My campfire was nothing but cold ashes. And there, in the soft earth next to my tent, were the tracks. They were massive, at least 18 inches long, vaguely human, but wider, deeper. They led from the forest, circled my tent, and then disappeared back into the dense woods. I looked over at the fire pit. The log I had been sitting on was gone. In its place was a deep impression in the ground, exactly where it had been lying. It hadn't been a log. It had been lying there, still as death, watching me the entire time. The log that blinked was its eye. It had been observing me for hours, and I had been sitting right on top of it. I didn't bother packing up properly. I shoved everything into my backpack, collapsed my tent, and ran. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I've never told anyone this story. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know it looked back at me through the wall of my tent. I went into those woods seeking solitude, but I found something else. I found proof that we are not the only intelligent beings walking this earth, and that some things are better left undiscovered in the deep, dark woods. The forest has its own rules, and its oldest rule is this: some logs are not logs at all, and you never want to be there when they decide to get up. Thanks for listening. And if you have your own encounter you'd like to share, drop it in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the wild. Stay safe out there. The beam from my headlamp cut a nervous path through the dense, moonless forest. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded amplified in the oppressive silence of the Cascade Mountains. I was out here chasing a rumor, a whisper among local hikers about strange howls and massive, unidentifiable tracks found near an old, abandoned mine. They called it the Devil's Maw. A fitting name, I thought, as I pushed aside a thick branch, the damp wood cold against my palm. The air grew colder, carrying a primal, musky scent I couldn't place. It was the kind of smell that tickles the back of your throat. A warning your ancient brain understands even if you don't. I'd been a skeptic my whole life, a journalist who dealt in facts, not folklore. But after my last assignment, covering a series of bizarre disappearances in this very region, I found myself drawn back. The official reports were tidy, blaming bear attacks or exposure. But the local stories, the ones told in hushed tones over cheap coffee, spoke of something else, something tall and powerful that walked on two legs. So, here I was, armed with a camera, a recorder, and a healthy dose of professional curiosity. I was beginning to regret. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a howl. Not like a wolf or a coyote. It was deeper. A resonant, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my boots. It was a sound of immense power and profound loneliness. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I switched off my headlamp, plunging myself into near total darkness, hoping the moon would offer some light, but there was no moon. Just a thick canopy of leaves overhead. The sound came again, closer this time. My journalistic instincts battled with my survival instincts. I slowly, carefully raised my night vision camera. The world turned a sickly green through the lens. I scanned the tree line. My breath held tight in my chest, and then I saw it. It wasn't clear at first, just a distortion, a patch of darkness that was darker than the surrounding night. It was massive, easily 9 feet tall and broad, built like a fortress of muscle and fur. It moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was terrifyingly unnatural for something so large. It wasn't crashing through the undergrowth. It was a part of it, moving like a shadow. I lowered the camera, my hands shaking. I could see it better with my own eyes now. A silhouette against the slightly less dark sky. It was standing maybe 50 yards away, its head tilted as if listening. The musky smell was overwhelming now, thick and animalistic. I could hear its breathing, a low, rhythmic rumble like a distant engine. I was completely, utterly frozen in place. Every horror story, every piece of campfire lore I'd ever dismissed came crashing down on me were real. He took a step, and the ground seemed to tremble. Another step. It was moving parallel to me, not directly toward me, but not away either. It was observing. I felt like a mouse being watched by an owl. Utterly exposed and helpless, my mind rested. Should I run? Scream? Play dead? None of those options felt viable. Running would be pointless. It could cover that distance in seconds. Screaming felt like an invitation. I don't know how long we stood there in that silent standoff. It felt like an eternity. The creature's head slowly turned, and I felt its gaze on me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt them. A heavy, intelligent pressure. There was no malice in that gaze, but there was a profound, ancient authority. It was the apex predator, and I was an intruder in its domain. This wasn't its world. The entire forest, the mountains, the night itself, belonged to Italiana. Then, something shifted. The creature lifted its massive head toward the sky, and for the first time, I saw a sliver of the moon break through the clouds. But as I watched, the creature raised a long, powerful arm, and its huge, dark form shifted, completely eclipsing the moonlight, the shape that blocked the moon. The title of a forgotten legend I'd read about. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random act. It was a display. A statement. I am here. I control the dark. It let out another of those deep, guttural calls. Not a roar of aggression, but a declaration of presence that echoed through the valleys. The sound was so powerful it felt like it was trying to rearrange my insides. Then, as silently as it appeared, it turned and melted back into the forest. One moment it was a terrifying, solid mass, and the next, it was just another shadow among 1,000 others. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, the musky scent began to fade, and the normal sounds of the forest slowly trickled back, in and out, hooting, the chirping of crickets. I stayed frozen for what must have been another 10 minutes before my legs would obey me again. I didn't run. I backed away slowly, deliberately, never taking my eyes off the spot where it had vanished. I didn't stop until I saw the familiar glint of my car parked at the trailhead. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still trembling, and threw myself inside. Locking the doors, I sat there in the silence of my car. The footage on my camera, the only proof that what I had seen wasn't a hallucination. Driving back to civilization, the streetlights and buildings felt alien, like a fragile facade built on a world that was far older and wilder than we could ever imagine. I was no longer a skeptic. I was a witness. I had looked into the heart of the unknown, and it had looked back. The story I had come for was no longer about folklore or local rumors. It was about a chilling truth that lives in the deep woods. A truth that can block out the moon and leave you in a darkness you'll never forget. I knew I would never be the same. The forest now holds a different meaning for me. It's a place of ancient power, of secrets that walk on 2 feet, and of a shape that I see every time I close my eyes. The first time I heard the sound, I thought it was the wind, a deep, mournful howl. A hollow, like it was coming from the very bones of the earth. I was deep in the pine barrens of northern Washington, a place where the trees are so thick, sunlight struggles to kiss the ground. My name is Ethan, and for years, I'd chased whispers of Bigfoot, collecting stories, but never truly believing. Not until that night. I was camped near a small, unnamed creek, the kind that gurgles secrets only the forest understands. The fire was dying down, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. That's when it came again. This time, it wasn't the wind. It was a roar, but not of anger. It was sorrowful, a sound so filled with ancient pain it made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. It was close. Close. I grabbed my maglite and my bear spray, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the tree line. The pines stood like silent, towering judges. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the chirp of crickets that suddenly sounded way too loud. I told myself it was a bear, maybe a cougar with a strange call. But the sound was wrong. It was guttural, yet articulate in its despair. It felt intelligent. As I stood there, listening, a pebble clattered down the small embankment to my left. My light snapped to the spot. 2 enormous, dark eyes reflected the beam back at me, set high above where any man should be. They blinked once, slowly, then vanished back into the suffocating darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a thick pine, my fire stoked high, convinced I was being watched. The next morning, driven by a mix of terror and an insatiable curiosity I couldn't explain, I decided to track it. I found the footprints near the creek bed where I'd seen the eyes. They were massive, just like the legends say, sunk deep into the soft earth. But there was something else. A trail of broken saplings, snapped clean in half, and large swaths of pine needles scraped away, as if something heavy had been dragged. It wasn't a hunting trail. It looked like a search pattern. I followed the trail for hours, deeper into the woods than I had ever dared to venture before. The forest grew quieter, the air colder. The path led me to a small, hidden clearing, dominated by a single, ancient pine tree, its trunk scarred by lightning. At its base was a shallow depression, almost like a makeshift grave, and lying within it was a smaller set of tracks, like those of a child, but with the same distinct shape as the larger ones. 2-year-old fatted bee on it was a memorial. That's when I understood. The hollow roar wasn't a threat, it was a lament, a cry of loss that echoed through these woods year after year. The creature I saw wasn't a monster hunting prey. It was a parent mourning its child. As I stood there, a cold dread mixed with a profound sadness washed over me. I had trespassed on a sacred, private grief. Suddenly, the air split with that same roar, but this time it was behind me, and it was no longer sorrowful. It was pure, undiluted rage. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. There it stood, at the edge of the clearing, a colossal silhouette against the fading light. It was easily 9 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair, its powerful shoulders heaving with every breath. Its eyes weren't just reflecting my light anymore. They were burning with an incandescent fury. It knew I had found its secret. It knew I was standing at the grave of its young. It took a step toward me, and the ground seemed to tremble. Another step. I was paralyzed, caught in the gravity of this ancient, grieving giant. I didn't raise my camera. I didn't reach for my bear spray. In that moment, I wasn't a researcher or an adventurer. I was an intruder who had stumbled upon a pain so deep it had become a part of the landscape itself. The creature raised its head to the sky and let out another roar, a sound that shook the very pine needles from the branches above. It was a warning, a final command to leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled backward, tripping over roots, never taking my eyes off it until I was swallowed by the trees. I ran harder and faster than I have ever run in my life, not looking back. The sound of its heartbroken rage chasing me all the way back to the civilized world. I never went back to those pines. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind howls just right, I think I can hear it. That hollow roar, a ghostly echo carried on the breeze, a timeless reminder of the wild, deep sorrow that lives in the heart of the woods. People ask me if I believe in Bigfoot now. I tell them I don't just believe. I know its pain. I've heard its soul cry out in the dark, and it's a sound you never, ever forget. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've had an encounter you can't explain, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. Stay safe out there. I've been a wilderness scout leader in the North Cascades for 11 years. Certified in Leave No Trace principles and advanced first aid. Responsible for guiding 72 overnight trips without serious incident. On October 14th, 2023, I led a group of 8 scouts, ages 12 to 15, up the Granite Creek Trail, toward Mebi Pass, a moderate 6-mile route through Old Douglas Fir that culminates in a Ridgeview campsite at 4,200 feet. Before we left the trailhead, the Forest Service volunteer mentioned casually that maintenance crews had been hearing wood knocks near the pass since late September. Always after dusk. Always from the dense timber on the eastern slope. Probably just elk, she said, though her expression suggested she didn't quite believe it. At 4:47 p.m., beneath the sky going violet at the edges, I clicked on my headlamp, counted heads one final time, and led the line into the tree cover. The forest smelled like wet cedar and rotting hemlock. That particular North Cascades humidity that clings to your jacket and seeps into your lungs. Our boots crunched over sword ferns and decomposing nurse logs thick with moss, the rhythm steady and familiar. 8 sets of footsteps, the occasional clink of carabiners, someone adjusting a hip belt. I kept the pace slow for the younger kids, checking my GPS every quarter mile, calling out landmarks, the split boulder at mile 2, the Creek Ford at 3.1. The radio crackled once with a ranger's voice doing an evening check-in from the district station, confirming our route and estimated arrival. Everything felt procedural, routine, safe. Then, maybe 20 minutes in, I heard a branch snap somewhere off to our left. Not the small crack of a squirrel or grouse, but something heavier, deliberate. The sound of wood breaking under significant weight in a place where nothing that large should have been moving. I raised my hand and the line stopped. 8 headlamps swung toward me, illuminating nothing but vertical tree trunks and the soft glow of suspended moisture. I counted silently elk, sometimes parallel trails during migration, but there was no hoof scrape, no rustle of brush, just that one snap, and then the forest resuming its low hum of insects in distant water. Probably a deer, I said, more for the kids than for myself. We kept mobbing, but I started listening differently, counting sounds, measuring distances. At mile 3, I heard it again, this time farther back, behind the rear of our line. A single heavy footfall on soft ground, followed by a pause so perfect it felt coordinated. I glanced at my co-leader, a college student named Ethan, and saw his eyes already scanning the tree line. He'd heard it, too. By the time we reached the ridge at 6:15 p.m., twilight had compressed into something thicker, and the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, just our breathing and the scrape of boots on granite. I set the kids to work pitching tents in a clearing ringed by hemlocks, their headlamps bobbing like fireflies, voices rising in the easy chatter of distraction. I was kneeling to check a tie-down when Ethan grabbed my shoulder and pointed toward the eastern tree line, maybe 60 yards out. You hear that? I held my breath. At first, nothing. Then a low, guttural exhalation. Too deep to be human, too resonant to be wind. It rolled through the trees like distant thunder, and every kid stopped talking at once. The air felt heavier suddenly, compressed, the way it does before a storm that hasn't arrived yet. My headlamp flickered once, dimmed, then returned to full brightness. I clicked the radio twice for a signal check. Static. Then nothing. I made everyone gather in the center of camp while Ethan and I did a perimeter walk with our high-lumen flashlights, scanning the tree line in overlapping arcs. Nothing moved. But the smell hit me near the eastern edge. Wet fur, animal musk, something feral and sharp that didn't belong to deer or bear. It hung in the air like a boundary we'd crossed without permission. When I returned to the group, I kept my voice calm and procedural. We're going to do a quick roll call. When I say your name, respond with "here" and stay in the light. I went down the list: Caleb, Mia Jackson, Leah, Noah, Emma, Tyler, Sophia, and each one answered immediately, their voices tight but present. Then, from somewhere behind the last tent, too far back to be one of ours, a ninth voice answered. Low, slow, unmistakably deliberate. Here? I counted again. 8 kids. 8 answers. But I'd heard 9. I told everyone to pack their sleeping bags back into their frames. No questions, no delays. We were descending tonight. That's when the tree line moved. Not wind, not shadows. A silhouette, massive and upright, crossing the gap between 2 hemlocks, maybe 40 yards out. It moved with a fluidity that didn't match its size. Shoulders wide enough to scrape bark, head clearing 8 feet easily. For 3 seconds, it was backlit by the faint glow of the ridge sky, and I saw the outline of long arms, a slope to the back, and a gait that was neither ape nor human, but something that had learned to walk like both. Then it stepped back into darkness. One of the kids gasped. Another started crying. I grabbed my bear spray, told Ethan to get them into a tight line, and back toward the group without turning away from the tree line. My headlamp caught nothing but vertical trunks and empty air, but I could feel it watching, measuring, deciding. We descended in 42 minutes, faster than we'd climbed. No one speaking, except to confirm count. I kept the radio on, even though it never worked, and held my light steady on the trail ahead, listening for footfalls that weren't ours. Twice, I heard branches breaking upslope, keeping pace. Once, at the creek ford, I smelled that musk again, thick and close, and Ethan whispered that he'd seen Aishin, not the low green of a raccoon or the amber of a coyote, but red orange 7 feet off the ground, unblinking. By the time we reached the trailhead at 8:03 p.m., parents were waiting with headlights on and engines running. I told them we'd spooked a bear. They believed me. But when I went back to the ranger station the next morning to file the report, the volunteer pulled me aside and showed me a photo on her phone. A footprint, 17 inches long, pressed deep into the mud near Mebi Pass. 5 distinct toes, found that morning by a trail crew. Probably a hoax, she said. But her hand was shaking when she deleted it. 3 weeks later, I was camping alone near Lake Wenatchee, testing new gear for winter trips, when I heard wood knocks in the dark. 2 strikes, deliberate, from the ridgeline above my tent. I didn't investigate. I stayed inside, headlamp off, listening to something large move through the trees just beyond the firelight's edge. And when I reviewed the audio I'd accidentally recorded during that October roll call, cleaning out old files from my phone, I heard it again. That ninth voice, answering from somewhere no kid could have been standing, low and slow and unmistakably there. I deleted the file, but I still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the woods outside my window feel closer than they should.